So, global warming and its effects by AI Camp. This dataset is dedicated to explaining how global warming has affected multiple areas of life, including devastating forest fires, horrible CO2 emissions, and horrifying temperature increases. Please view with consideration. On the first graph, if a dot is yellow, it signifies a high FFMC, which stands for Fine Fuel Moisture Code. When you have a high FFMC, that means that there's a likely chance of a wildfire in that area due to the fact that it is very dry. This is becoming a big factor in climate change. Then the second graph basically explains global CO2 emissions by country. And you would expect that a country with a lot of CO2 emissions has a lower life expectancy, but in the graph, it's actually quite the opposite. And then the second map or the graph shows global life expectancy because of CO2 emissions. And in this case, Canada actually had the highest life expectancy. Then the third graph for this case was, it basically showed how global forest fires evolved by month, day, and temperature. So yeah, the forest fires grew in number as the months went by. And then the chart that has the circles basically has different layers to explain how many fires have begun to occur. And the more the layers, the more the fires have occurred. Then there's the 3D chart explaining how many fires have occurred with data for months, temperature, and wind. And so if the circle is higher up and it has a higher RH counter, then that means that there has been a lot of fires in that area and in that time. And then the photo is basically just a symbolic photo of our world state today. And then finally for me, wind versus temperature. This basically explains global forest fires by the wind and temperature. So the higher they are, the more there have been forest fires.
Yeah, this shows since 2004 how many times people search global warming in Google. And we can know more people care about global warming now.
So this scatter plot and line graph basically show the temperature change of a certain country, and that means like how much the difference in temperatures between 2 years. And basically, if the temperature change is positive or above zero, it basically means that the temperatures are rising, and we can clearly see that like over the past 20 years, the temperature change has been rising greatly more, which shows like global warming is increasing significantly. So for the first graph, it's a world map of CO2 emissions from every country. And this just shows like the leading contributors, and we can see like US and China are like up there, but they're only up there because of their like population. And so our second graph shows the CO2 emissions per capita, and that basically takes into account the population of a country. So here you can see that US and China are like reduced. And so these two graphs basically show like which countries should like focus on like reducing their CO2 emissions, because like CO2 emissions are great is a factor of global warming because it like traps heat in the atmosphere.
And then finally, we have a graph that shows the different average temperature of different countries over the past several years. You can see how the temperature has changed over time. And this can be interesting to see how it's changed different countries. And you can compare this graph with this chart to other graphs that show the CO2 emissions of each country. And then you can see how much the CO2 emissions affect the change in temperature.
Thank you for listening.